Karen's voice cracked like a whip through the Montana wind, shrill enough to scare the cattle. "Your mutt's on my land, and I'm calling the cops," she screeched, waving her phone like a grenade about to go off. Senator Jack Harlan stood on his porch, boots caked in mud, staring down the woman who turned his quiet Sunday into a circus. His border collie, Rusty, sat calmly at his side, oblivious to the storm brewing not just in the darkening sky, but in the clash of wills unfolding on his ranch. Jack had dealt with hostile constituents, corrupt lobbyists, and even a rogue bear on his property, but Karen from the HOA was a new kind of beast. She'd moved into the gated community bordering his 200-acre ranch 6 months ago, armed with a clipboard and a vendetta against anything that didn't fit her manicured vision of suburban perfection. Rusty, with his habit of chasing rabbits across property lines, had become her personal white whale. Today, she'd caught him sniffing her prized azaleas, and now she was here, red-faced and righteous, demanding justice. "You don't get it, do you?" Jack said, his voice low, steady, the kind that carried weight in Senate hearings. "This is my land. My dog. My rules." He gestured to the sprawling fields behind him, where his family had worked the soil for 3 generations. Karen didn't flinch. She stepped closer, her designer boots sinking into the mud, and jabbed a finger at him. "Your dog's a menace, and I'm not leaving until he's locked up or worse." The air thickened with tension, the kind that makes your pulse race and your palms sweat. Rusty, sensing the shift, let out a low growl, his ears pinned back. Jack's hand instinctively dropped to the dog's scruff, calming him, but his eyes never left Karen. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet, but her fury made her seem 10 feet tall. Her husband, Greg, hovered behind her, a nervous shadow in a polo shirt, muttering apologies she ignored. "Karen, maybe we should," he started, but she cut him off with a glare that could curdle milk. Jack wasn't just any rancher. As a U.S. Senator, he'd spent years navigating the snake pit of Washington, D.C., brokering deals and defusing crises. But this was personal. This was his home, his sanctuary, where he escaped the suits and the spotlight. Karen didn't know who he was. She hadn't bothered to ask. To her, he was just the guy with the dog that dared to cross her invisible line in the dirt. And that ignorance was about to make this showdown legendary. "Ma'am," Jack said, his tone sharpening, "you're standing on my property right now. You might want to rethink your threats." Karen's eyes narrowed, and she held up her phone, the 911 call already connected. "This is Karen Mitchell," she barked into the receiver. "I'm at 47, Harlan Road, and I'm dealing with a trespassing dog and an uncooperative neighbor. Send someone now." Jack's jaw tightened. He could hear the dispatcher's tinny voice through the phone, asking for clarification. Karen's accusations grew wilder. Rusty was a dangerous animal, Jack was harassing her, the ranch was an eyesore. Each word stoked the fire in Jack's chest, but he kept his cool. He'd learned long ago that losing your temper meant losing the fight. Still, the urge to tell her exactly who she was messing with was almost irresistible. Greg, still lingering behind Karen, finally spoke up. "Look, sir, we don't want trouble. Maybe we can just talk this out." His voice was pleading, but Karen whipped around. "Don't you dare undermine me, Greg," she snapped. "This man thinks he's above the law. Well, he's not." Jack almost laughed at the irony. If only she knew the laws he'd helped write. The wind picked up, rattling the old oak by the porch and sending a chill through the air. Rusty whined softly, sensing the storm, both literal and figurative, closing in. Jack's mind raced. He could end this now, flash his Senate ID, and watch Karen's face crumple as she realized her mistake. But where was the lesson in that? She needed to learn that not every battle was hers to win, that community wasn't built on petty power trips. And Rusty? He was just a dog, doing what dogs do. This wasn't about him, it was about Karen's need to control, to dominate, to make the world bend to her will. "Karen," Jack said, stepping off the porch, closing the distance between them. You've got one chance to walk away before this gets bigger than you can handle. His voice was calm, but there was steel in it, the kind that made seasoned politicians flinch. Karen didn't back down. She planted her feet, her phone still pressed to her ear. You're threatening me now? Oh, this is going on the HOA report. Jack's patience snapped like a dry twig. You want a report? Fine. Let's talk about your illegal fence extensions, your unpermitted gazebo, and the fact that your sprinklers are stealing water from the community line. Karen's mouth opened, then closed, her face paling. Greg's eyes widened, and he took a step back, as if distancing himself from the fallout. Jack had done his homework. Years in politics had taught him to know his opponents better than they knew themselves. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone again, asking if Karen needed immediate assistance. She hesitated, her confidence wavering for the first time. Jack seized the moment. Tell them the truth, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Tell them you're harassing a man on his own property over a dog chasing a rabbit. Or better yet, hang up and walk away. Karen's hand trembled, but she didn't lower the phone. Instead, she doubled down. This isn't over, she hissed, her eyes blazing. You'll regret this. She turned on her heel, dragging Greg with her, and stormed back toward her SUV parked at the edge of Jack's driveway. Rusty barked once, sharp and triumphant, as if claiming victory. Jack watched them go, his heart pounding. This wasn't the end and knew that. Karen wasn't the type to let go of a grudge. She'd be back, with more complaints, more calls, maybe even a lawyer. But Jack wasn't worried. He'd faced worse than Karen in the Senate chambers, and he'd always come out on top. Still, something about her venom, her absolute refusal to see reason, gnawed at him. This wasn't just about a dog or a property line. It was about two visions of the world colliding, his, rooted in hard work and loyalty, and hers, built on control and entitlement. As the first raindrops fell, Jack knelt beside Rusty, scratching behind his ears. You're gonna get me in trouble, boy, he murmured, but there was a smile in his voice. He stood, gazing out at the ranch his grandfather had built, the land that had shaped him into the man he was. Karen could call 911 100 times. She could rally the entire HOA. But this was his home, and he'd fight for it, dog, dirt, and all. The storm broke, rain hammering the roof of the porch. Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from his chief of staff about an urgent vote in D.C. tomorrow. He sighed, the weight of his two worlds settling on his shoulders. Karen didn't know who he was, but she was about to find out. And when she did, this little dog dispute would be the least of her problems. The rain came down in sheets now, turning the dirt drive into a slick mess as Karen's SUV peeled out, spraying gravel like shrapnel. Jack Harlan stood on his porch, watching the taillights vanish into the storm, Rusty's warm flank pressed against his leg. The dog's eyes followed the car too, as if he knew this wasn't over. Jack's phone buzzed again, another text from his chief of staff, Claire, reminding him of the red-eye flight to D.C. He ignored it. His mind was still on Karen, her venomous certainty, and the way she turned a stray paw print into a declaration of war. Inside, the ranch house smelled of cedar and coffee, a sanctuary of worn leather and family history. Jack kicked off his boots, mud flaking onto the oak floor, and poured a whiskey. He didn't usually drink this early on a Sunday, but Karen had a way of making exceptions feel necessary. Rusty curled up by the fireplace, his fur still damp, and Jack sank into the armchair, staring at the framed photo on the mantel, his late wife, Emily, laughing with their daughter, Sarah, on this very porch. They'd loved this land as fiercely as he did. Losing Emily to cancer 3 years ago had carved a hole in him, one that politics and power couldn't fill. The ranch, and Rusty, were all he had left of her. His phone rang, shattering the quiet. Claire's name flashed on the screen. Jack, you there? Her voice was sharp, D.C. polished, but tinged with worry. You didn't answer my texts. Flight's at 10 p.m., and the vote on the conservation bill is tomorrow. You need to be here. I'll be there, Jack said, his voice rougher than he intended. Just had a neighbor issue. Claire paused, sensing the edge in his tone. Anything I need to handle? Not yet, he said, though he wasn't sure. Karen's 911 call could escalate. Town sheriffs didn't take kindly to city folks stirring up trouble, but they also didn't love politicians throwing their weight around. Jack wasn't about to play the senator card unless he had to. Just keep the team ready for tomorrow. I'll call if anything changes. He hung up, but the unease lingered. Karen wasn't just a nuisance, she was a symptom of something bigger. The HOA had been creeping closer to his ranch for years, their cookie-cutter houses and manicured lawns encroaching on the wild Montana he'd fought to protect. As a senator, he'd pushed bills to preserve public lands, to keep places like his ranch free from developers' claws. But Karen represented a different kind of threat, one that didn't care about history or heart, only rules and appearances. By Monday morning, Jack was in D.C., trading his flannel for a suit and his open fields for marble halls. The Senate chamber hummed with the usual chaos, whispered deals, clinking coffee cups, and the occasional glare across party lines. The conservation bill, his passion project, was up for a vote, a hard-won fight to protect millions of acres from drilling. Jack's speech was ready, his arguments sharp, but his mind kept drifting back to Karen's voice, her finger jabbing at him, and Rusty's low growl. He shook it off, focusing on the task at hand. He couldn't afford distractions, not today. Back in Montana, Karen was busy. She'd spent Sunday night rallying the HOA, her emails a flurry of exclamation points and bolded demands. By noon Monday, she'd organized a meeting at the community center, a sterile box of a building that smelled like bleach and bad decisions. The room buzzed with her allies, retirees with too much time, young professionals with too much ambition, and Greg, slouched in a corner, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Karen stood at the podium, her blonde bob as sharp as her tone, holding up a photo of Rusty's paw prints in her flower bed like it was evidence in a murder trial. This dog, she said, her voice carrying the weight of a prosecutor, is a threat to our community. And his owner? A bully who thinks he's untouchable. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few nodded, others whispered, but Greg just stared at his shoes. Karen didn't mention the 911 call, she didn't need to. The sheriff's deputy had shown up at Jack's ranch after she'd left, only to find it empty, Jack already on his way to the airport. The deputy, a local named Tom who'd known Jack's family for decades, had rolled his eyes at the complaint and promised to look into it. Karen wasn't satisfied. She'd done her research by then, scouring property records and Google, piecing together who Jack was. The discovery that he was a U.S. senator hadn't humbled her, it had fueled her. If anything, it made her angrier. He wasn't just a rancher ignoring her rules, he was a powerful man who thought he could ignore her. She'd spent hours drafting a formal complaint to the HOA board, demanding fines, a restraining order for Rusty, and an investigation into Jack's unpermitted ranch operations. She even hinted at calling the local news, imagining the headline, "Senator's Dog Terrorizes Neighborhood." By Tuesday, Jack was back in Montana, exhausted but victorious. The conservation bill had passed by a razor-thin margin. He'd barely slept, but the ranch called him home. He was unloading his truck when Tom's patrol car rolled up, dust trailing behind it. Rusty bounded over, tail wagging, as Tom stepped out, his hat tipped back. "Jack," he said, scratching Rusty's ears, "you've got a problem named Karen Mitchell." Tom filled him in, the 911 call, the HOA meeting, Karen's crusade. "She's got half the neighborhood riled up," Tom said, leaning against his car. "Says your dog's a public safety hazard. Wants him kenneled or worse." Jack's stomach twisted. He'd expected pushback, but this was personal. Karen wasn't just after Rusty, she was after his way of life. "You know me, Tom," Jack said, his voice steady but tight. "Rusty's no threat. This is about her ego, not my dog." Tom nodded, his face grim. I know. But she's got the HOA board eating out of her hand. They're talking fines, maybe animal control. You need to shut this down before it gets ugly. Jack thanked him and watched the patrol car disappear down the road. The ranch felt quieter now, the air heavy with more than just the promise of another storm. He called Claire, updating her on the situation, and she promised to dig into Karen's background discreetly. If she's got skeletons, Claire said, I'll find them. Jack didn't want it to come to that, but he wasn't naive. In politics, you played clean until you couldn't. That evening, Karen struck again. A certified letter arrived, stuffed with HOA violations, Rusty's trespassing, Jack's unmaintained fence, even the height of his grass. The fines totaled $2,500, with a warning that noncompliance could lead to a lien on his property. Jack read it twice, his blood pressure rising with every word. He'd fought oil companies and bureaucrats, but this suburban dictator was testing him in ways they never had. He called a meeting with his ranch hands, a tight-knit crew who'd worked the land with him for years. Over coffee in the barn, he laid out the situation. This woman wants a war, he said, tossing the letter on the table. I don't want to give her one, but I'm not losing this place. His foreman, Maria, a no-nonsense woman with a scar from a roping accident, leaned forward. Let me talk to her, she said, her eyes glinting. I know her type. She'll back down if you push hard enough. Jack shook his head. Not yet. I want to try reason first. But even as he said it, he doubted reason would work. Karen wasn't interested in compromise, she wanted dominance. The next morning, Jack drove to the HOA office, Rusty in the passenger seat, his head out the window. The office was a beige nightmare, all fluorescent lights and fake plants. Karen was there, flanked by two board members, her smile smug as Jack walked in. Senator Harlan, she said, her voice dripping with mock surprise. I didn't expect you to show up in person. She knew now. Good. Jack set the violation letter on the desk. This stops now, he said, his voice calm but unyielding. You're targeting me, my dog, and my home. You don't want this fight. Karen's smile didn't waver. Oh, Senator, I'm not afraid of you. This is about community standards. Your dog doesn't belong here, and frankly, neither do you. The room went silent, the board members shifting uncomfortably. Jack leaned in, his voice low. You're playing a dangerous game, Karen. Keep pushing, and you'll find out what happens when you cross someone who's fought bigger battles than you can imagine. The air in the HOA office crackled with tension, Karen's smug smile clashing with Jack Harlan's steely gaze. The two board members flanking her, a retiree named Doris with a perm as tight as her frown and a young lawyer named Ethan who kept checking his watch, seemed to shrink under the weight of the standoff. Rusty, oblivious to the human drama, lay at Jack's feet, his tail thumping softly against the linoleum. Jack's warning hung in the air, but Karen didn't flinch. You think you can intimidate me, she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I've dealt with men like you, arrogant, entitled, thinking your status makes you untouchable. Jack's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. Years in the Senate had taught him to read people, and Karen was a book written in bold, angry ink. She wasn't just fighting for her precious HOA rules, this was personal, a crusade to prove she could bend anyone to her will, even a U.S. senator. This isn't about intimidation, Jack said, his voice low and deliberate. It's about you picking a fight you can't win. Drop this, Karen. For your own sake. Doris coughed nervously, and Ethan finally spoke up, his voice tentative. Maybe we can find a compromise. A fence modification, or, Karen cut him off with a glare. No compromises, she snapped. This man's dog is a menace, and his ranch is dragging down property values. We have standards. Jack almost laughed at the absurdity. His family's ranch, a century-old cornerstone of the community, an eyesore. But he saw the glint in Karen's eyes, the hunger for control. This wasn't about Rusty or property values. It was about power. Jack left the office with a curt nod, Rusty trotting beside him. He'd tried reason, but Karen was a brick wall. As he drove back to the ranch, his phone buzzed Claire, his chief of staff, with the dirt she'd promised. Karen Mitchell's got a history, Claire said, her voice clipped. Fined twice in her old neighborhood for filing false complaints against neighbors. Moved here after a lawsuit over a disputed property line. She's a serial complainer, Jack, but she's careful. Nothing sticks. Jack gripped the steering wheel tighter. Keep digging, he said. I need leverage. Back at the ranch, the storm from days ago had left the fields lush but muddy, the air thick with the scent of wet earth. Jack walked the property line with Maria, his foreman, inspecting the fence Karen had complained about. It was sturdy, built by his grandfather, but a few posts leaned slightly, victims of time and weather. She's got no case, Maria said, kicking a post to test it. But she'll keep coming. People like her don't stop. Jack nodded, his mind racing. He could fix the fence, muzzle Rusty, even pay the fines, but that would be admitting defeat. And Jack Harlan didn't lose, not to bullies like Karen. By Friday, Karen escalated. A sheriff's deputy, not Tom this time, but a young rookie named Carter showed up with an animal control officer in tow. Karen had filed another complaint, claiming Rusty had attacked her azaleas again. The officer, a wiry woman with a clipboard, looked uncomfortable as she explained they had to investigate. Jack let them see Rusty, who wagged his tail and licked Carter's hand. Does this look like a dangerous animal to you? Jack asked, his tone calm but edged with frustration. Carter shrugged, clearly embarrassed. Just following orders, sir. The officer took photos of the property line and left, but the visit lit a fire under Jack. He called a town hall meeting, leveraging his Senate clout to pack the community center with locals, ranchers, farmers, and longtime residents who knew the Harlan name. Karen showed up, predictably, with her HOA posse, but the room was Jack's. He stood at the podium, Rusty at his side, and laid out the situation, the complaints, the fines, the threats to his dog and his home. This isn't just about me, he said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd fought for his community his whole life. It's about who we are. We don't let outsiders dictate our way of life. The crowd roared approval, but Karen stood up, undeterred. You're not above the law, Senator, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Your dog's a problem, and your ranch is a blight. We're building a community here, not a barnyard. Gasps rippled through the room. Jack's eyes locked on hers, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. You want a community, he said. Start by respecting the people in it. The room erupted in applause, but Karen's face was stone. She stormed out, Greg trailing behind like a scolded puppy. Jack thought he'd won a battle, but Karen was playing a longer game. Over the weekend, she took her fight public, posting a scathing video on the neighborhood's social media page. She stood in her pristine yard, holding up photos of paw prints and a chewed-up flower, calling Jack a reckless elitist and Rusty a vicious beast. The video went viral locally, picked up by a small news outlet hungry for drama. By Monday, Jack's office was flooded with calls, some supportive, others echoing Karen's outrage. Claire was furious. She's turning this into a PR nightmare, she said over the phone. We need to counter this, Jack. Now. Jack didn't want a media war, but he wasn't about to let Karen rewrite his story. He invited the local reporter to the ranch, giving a tour of the land his family had stewarded for generations. He spoke of Emily, of Sarah, of the values that kept him grounded. Rusty, ever the star, charmed the reporter by fetching a stick. The resulting article painted Jack as a man of the people, Karen as a petty tyrant. But the victory was short-lived. Late Tuesday, Jack got a call from Tom. Animal control's coming tomorrow, he said, his voice grim. Karen's got a petition with enough signatures to force a hearing. They're talking about seizing Rusty. Jack's heart stopped. He looked at Rusty, asleep by the fire, and felt a surge of protectiveness that bordered on rage. This wasn't just about a dog Anna Marie, it was about everything he'd fought for, everything he'd lost. The hearing was a circus. The community center was packed, split between Jack's supporters and Karen's HOA allies. Rusty sat calmly beside Jack, leashed but proud, as Karen presented her case, photos, complaints, even a tearful testimony about her trauma. Jack's lawyer, a friend from D.C., dismantled her claims, citing property laws and Rusty's clean record. But the board, swayed by Karen's theatrics, voted 3-2 to declare Rusty a nuisance animal. The order: confine him to a kennel or face removal. Jack walked out, numb, Rusty's leash tight in his hand. Outside, Karen stood triumphant, her smile a knife in his gut. "You should have listened," she said. Jack didn't respond. He couldn't. The weight of the decision crushed him, not just the loss of Rusty's freedom, but the realization that his home, his sanctuary, was no longer safe from people like her. That night, Jack sat on his porch, Rusty at his side, the stars hidden by clouds. He thought of Emily, who'd loved this dog as fiercely as he did. He thought of Sarah, now in college, who'd begged him to protect Rusty. And he thought of the land, the life he'd sworn to defend. Karen had won this round, but the war wasn't over. He'd fight for Rusty, for the ranch, for the values she'd never understand. The next morning, Jack called Claire. "File an appeal," he said. "And get me a meeting with the governor." He wasn't just a senator, was a man with a legacy, and he'd use every ounce of his power to protect it. But as he hung up, a bitter truth settled in his chest: some battles, no matter how hard you fight, leave scars that never heal. Rusty nuzzled his hand, and Jack's resolve hardened. Karen had started this, but he'd finish it in his terms, for his home, for his heart.